there's a name you can't stop repeating in your mind. A face that returns to you in moments of silence. A memory that plays like a film you didn't ask to watch again and again and again. Maybe it's someone you loved. Maybe it's someone you barely knew. Maybe it's someone who hurt you, or someone who left before you ever understood why. Whatever the reason, you can't seem to let them go. And no matter how much time passes, they haunt you, not like a ghost, but like a mirror you're afraid to look into. Carl Jung had a word for this kind of haunting, a psychic projection. But what if I told you this obsession is not about them? It's about you. And what if I told you that the reason you can't stop thinking about them is because they touch something buried deep within your unconscious, something ancient, unspoken, unresolved? In this long-form reflection, we'll explore what Jung believed about love, longing, and obsession. Why we become so psychologically entangled with certain people, and why letting go isn't always about forgetting, but about integrating. So close your eyes, let the thoughts come, let the memory rise, because tonight we're not trying to escape the obsession, we're going to understand it. You meet thousands of people in your lifetime, you pass by faces every day, but then one person appears, and suddenly they are everything. Why? Jung believed that the people we obsess over are not random. They are symbolic. They carry with them a kind of psychological charge, an energy that stirs something within us that has long been asleep. It might be attraction, it might be fear, it might be admiration, or even hatred, but it's never neutral. Jung called this a constellation, when something or someone activates an entire network of unconscious material inside us. In simpler words, they awaken parts of you you didn't know existed. So the reason you can't stop thinking about them is because you're not just thinking about them. You're thinking about yourself, about the forgotten parts, the shadow parts, the parts that were never allowed to be seen. In Jungian psychology, each of us carries a figure in the unconscious, a kind of inner other. For men, this is often represented as the anima, the inner feminine. For women, it's the animus, the inner masculine. These are not gender roles. They are symbolic representations of the soul, and they often appear in dreams, fantasies, and yes, in obsessions. When you feel completely possessed by your feelings for someone, you may not be falling in love with who they are, but with what they represent inside you. They are the face of your anima, the voice of your animus. They are in essence your own soul, disguised as another person. Jung believed this was why romantic obsession can feel so overwhelming, because we are projecting the deepest parts of our own psyche onto another human being. It is not just infatuation, it is spiritual recognition, but it is also an illusion, because no one can carry the full weight of your unconscious for long. When you project, you are seeing yourself, but you don't know it yet. You see in them the strength you lack, the tenderness you crave, the mystery you long for, or the darkness you've always feared. They are your fantasy, your story, your unfinished sentence. But here's the truth. The more you idealize them, the more invisible they actually become. Because when we project, we don't love the person. We love what they awaken in us. This is why the connection feels spiritual, timeless, unbreakable, but also why it never quite feels real. Because the image is more powerful than the reality, and yet it's real enough to break your heart. Jung didn't believe obsessions were pointless. He believed they were calls to growth. If someone lives in your mind long after they've left your life, ask yourself, why did they come? What did they touch inside me? Often obsessions are the beginning of individuation, Jung's term for the long, slow journey toward becoming whole. That person who left you breathless, maybe they carried a lesson you refused to face. Maybe they mirrored your potential or your pain. Maybe your task is not to get over them, but to integrate what they showed you, to become the person you thought only they could awaken. And when that happens, the obsession dissolves, not because you stopped caring, but because you finally understood. They may be gone, moved on, or maybe they never even arrived, not in the way you imagined they would. And yet, there they are, still living in your head, taking up space in the quiet hours of night, making guest appearances in dreams, in songs, in moments of stillness. Why? Why does your mind return to them like waves returning to the shore? Jung might say, because you're not done learning from them, but not because they are your destiny, not because they are your soulmate, but because they are your mirror. And somewhere in that mirror is a face you've avoided your entire life, your shadow. Carl Jung believed that every one of us has a shadow, a side of ourselves we deny, repress, or disown, not because it's evil, but because at some point in our life, we were taught it was unacceptable. Maybe it was your sensitivity, or your anger, or your ambition, or your vulnerability, or your sexuality, or your darkness. Whatever it was, you pushed it down, buried it beneath layers of shoulds and should-nots. And then one day, someone walks into your life, and they carry that very energy you tried to forget. They are wild when you are reserved, mysterious when you are straightforward, cruel in the ways you secretly fear you could be, free in the ways you wish you were. They don't complete you, they trigger you, and yet you can't stop thinking about them. Why? Because they've activated your shadow, and your psyche is begging you to reclaim it. Why do we so often become obsessed with the emotionally unavailable? Jung would say, because our unconscious is trying to recreate a wound, not to suffer, but to resolve it. We return to the same dynamic, the same rejection, the same abandonment, in hopes that this time it will be different, that this time we will be chosen, seen, loved, enough. But here's the truth, they are not going to heal that wound. They can't, because the wound didn't begin with them. And that's the secret pain of obsession. We think we're chasing them, but we're actually chasing the moment we first felt unworthy of love. Until we bring that memory to consciousness, until we look the shadow in the face, we will keep returning to the same obsession in different forms, different names, different faces, same ache. You think about them when you're lonely. You imagine what could have been. You replay conversations. You rewrite the ending. But the truth is, you're in love with a fantasy. And Jung didn't believe fantasy was bad. In fact, he believed fantasy served a purpose. It protected us from reality, until we're strong enough to face it. The fantasy is your soul's way of saying, not yet. You're not ready to confront the truth just yet. So you create a story, one in which they were perfect, or one in which you could have saved them, or one in which you were enough, if only things had been different. But the danger of fantasy is this: if you live there too long, you begin to lose your grip on what's actually possible for your life. You start to think that only they could make you feel whole, that only that version of love could satisfy your heart. But Jung would say, wholeness does not come from another person. It comes from integrating the parts of yourself you've left behind. And if you're brave enough to let go of the fantasy, you might finally begin to find those parts again. Sometimes, obsession feels like madness. You wake up thinking about them. You go to sleep thinking about them. You wonder if you're broken, if something inside you has snapped. But Jung had another idea. He believed that many forms of psychological suffering were actually spiritual emergencies in disguise. Moments when the soul cries out, not for them, but for you, for your healing, for your truth, for your wholeness. He wrote, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. But when obsession takes hold, the avoidance becomes impossible. You're forced to feel everything, to sit in the fire, to confront the emptiness you've spent years avoiding. And that confrontation, painful as it is often the beginning of something sacred. Not the end of a love story, but the beginning of individuation. You quote, "We've tried everything. Deleting photos, blocking numbers, burning letters, erasing conversations, and still there they are. A memory, lodged in your chest like a splinter beneath the skin." Maybe it's not about forgetting. Maybe it's not about erasing. Maybe the real path forward is integration. Carl Jung never asked us to forget our pain. He asked us to bring it into consciousness, to look at what hurts, to hold it gently, and to ask it what it came to teach. So tonight we won't try to sever the cord. We'll trace it back to where it began. And in doing so, maybe will finally loosen its grip. People say you need closure, that if you had answers you'd finally move on. That if they explained why, if they apologized, if they came back and gave you one more moment, you'd be free. But Jung would ask, what if closure isn't something they can give you? What if the desire for closure is really a desire to not feel pain, to have someone else carry the burden of your healing? Jung believed true healing comes from within, not from what they say, but from what you understand. Understanding that their behavior was never a reflection of your worth, that their leaving didn't mean you were unlovable, that the pain they caused awakened something already waiting inside you to be healed. And so the obsession lingers, because you've mistaken their silence for your sentence. But you are not sentenced, you are being summoned into your own wholeness. You weren't just grieving them, you were grieving the future you imagined, the life you thought would unfold, the version of yourself that only existed in that story. Grief, Jung knew, is not linear. It's not a staircase upward, it's a spiral, a labyrinth. And every time you think you're done grieving, another layer surfaces. But don't run, stay. Sit with the loss, let it teach you. Because when you grieve the fantasy, you make space for reality. A reality where your happiness no longer depends on their presence. A reality where your worth isn't defined by their approval. A reality where you become the person you hoped they would make you feel like. That's not letting go, that's transformation. Now we turn inward, not to forget them, but to remember you. What parts of you woke up when they entered your life? What dreams reawakened? What insecurities? What longings? Write them down, not to obsess, but to observe. This is what Jung meant by making the unconscious conscious. You stop projecting, you stop fantasizing, you stop begging for something outside you to fix the ache. Instead you ask, what inside me is still waiting to be seen? You return to your inner child, to the first time you felt invisible, the first time you believed love was something you had to earn, the first time you were told you were too much or not enough. And you say to that child, I see you, I'm staying, I won't abandon you like they did. This is healing, not dramatic, not cinematic, but slow, gentle, sacred. There's a kind of alchemy in heartbreak, not the kind that turns lead into gold, but the kind that turns longing into awareness, pain into purpose, obsession into wisdom. Jung wrote, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And sometimes it takes losing someone to remember who that is, because we don't just lose people, we lose illusions, masks, false selves, and underneath it all, you begin to meet you again. Not the version who needed their love, not the version who believed they were the answer, but the version who has always been enough, even when you didn't know it. There will come a day when you wake up and don't think of them first, not because you forced them out, not because you hate them, but because something in you has finally been reclaimed. This is the quiet revolution Carl Jung spoke of: individuation, a return to self, not as a fixed identity, but as a living, breathing relationship between all the parts of who you are. That's when you stop obsessing, not because they disappear, but because you no longer need them to fill the space that was always yours to inhabit. The truth is, they were never the center of your story. They were the symbol of everything you longed for: acceptance, belonging, ecstasy, safety, recognition, freedom. Your psyche latched onto them because it believed, if I can have them, I can finally have that. But Jung teaches us something powerful here. You must learn to separate the symbol from the source. They were not the source of your healing, only the mirror. The obsession fades when you stop reaching outward and start asking, how can I give myself what I was chasing through them? And slowly, almost without noticing, you begin to rebuild. Jung said that falling in love is often a kind of temporary madness, not because it's not real, but because we project so much of our unconscious material onto the other person. We don't fall in love with them, we fall in love with the part of ourselves they carry for us. But here's the magic: once you become aware of the projection, you can reclaim it. That's what healing looks like. Not cutting people off, not pretending it never mattered, but taking back the part of you you gave away. Your passion, your creativity, your desire, your vulnerability, your depth. You say that wasn't just theirs, that was mine, and now I'm taking it back. You don't forget them, you just stop losing yourself in them. In the end, you won't need to erase them, you'll just integrate them. They will become a chapter, a season, a whisper of who you were on the way to who you're becoming. And when you think of them again, and you will, there won't be the ache, there won't be the spiral, there will just be stillness, maybe even gratitude, not because they did everything right, but because their presence awakened you to something you needed to see. And now that work is done, they will fade into the background. As you return to the foreground, you'll feel whole, not because you found the one, but because you became the one you were always looking for. Even after healing, they might show up in dreams. You might hear a song or see their name. A memory might flash unexpectedly. That's okay. That's not regression. That's the psyche's way of reminding you this mattered, but it no longer defines you. In Jungian psychology, we don't chase perfection. We don't strive to be cured. We strive to live symbolically, to understand what our experiences mean on the level of soul. So when that memory returns, you don't panic. You breathe, you listen, and maybe you smile. Not because they're back, but because you are. This is your story now, not theirs. Not a love story left unfinished, but a self-story finally begun. They were a mirror, you are the light. And now you see yourself clearly. You are not broken. You are not unlovable. You are not obsessed. You are remembering. You are healing. You are becoming whole. And that, Jung would say, is the deepest love story of all.